Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Batra daf tzadichet. We're going to get started. We'll go back to the Mishna from the beginning, and we'll start at the bottom of tzadi zayin amud bet. Hamochir yayin lechavero v'yichmitz. Maybe before we even start, I'll just go back for a minute to the Mishnah we did in this chapter until now. We started this chapter with seeds that go bad, right? And as opposed to the previous chapters, which was if I buy this, what does this sale include? Until now, we've been discussing in this chapter, I buy something, but it's not really what I wanted. Okay, so either the seeds weren't really good seeds, nothing was gonna grow from them, or you gave me X amount of bad stuff. Again, maybe, right, it's about quality of what I got. And here we're talking about wine that goes bad. Okay, so I bought wine, which seemed to be good, but then it went bad. Now, it doesn't really talk about a time frame. I mentioned that yesterday. So you sold me wine and it went bad. So you are not responsible anymore. The seller doesn't have to be responsible. I can't return it. Too bad on me. I'll have to see exactly what case the Gemara is talking, the Mishnah is talking about. We're going to have a debate in the Gemara. Now, if it's known that the seller sells bad wine, or often the wine goes bad. Now, it has to be known, but I didn't know about it at the time when I bought it. If I knew about it and I bought it anyway, well, my tough luck. But if the wine it's known that your stuff goes bad, and I find this out later and you didn't tell me, well, then it's a mekach ta'ud. I can go back and say, hey, look, you sold me bad stuff and you didn't tell me it was going to go bad. And basically you would be responsible. If though you promised me yayin mevusam when I went to the store, yayin mevusam is wine that's preserved somewhat. It's supposed to last longer. How long should it last? Until Shavuot, because after Shavuot it gets really hot and the wine wouldn't last longer than that, but it does need to last until Shavuot, and if not, I can go back and return it. V'yashan, if I ask for old wine, mishal eshtaked, it would be from a year before, and it would, meant to last the year. Umiyushan, if I ask for yayin that's miyushan, which is aged wine, mishal shalosh shanim, it's from 3 years ago, meaning, and it could last up to the end of 3 years, which we'll get to that in the Gemara. I'm a Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina. So comes Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina. What's really interesting us is this first part, that without all these other unique circumstances, basically anyone who sells wine, if the wine goes bad, tough luck on the buyer. So Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina says, let's just be clear here. Loshanu ela bekan, and really what he's doing is qualifying the Mishnah. Loshanu ela bekan kanim delokech. This is, I can't return wine if it goes bad on me if I moved it into my own vessels, my own jugs, my own barrels. But if I left it exactly as I got it, it should have lasted. If I kept it in your, I bought it from you and I kept it in your jugs, I could say, look, I kept it exactly as you were. I didn't do anything different. I kept it in the exact same jugs, and your wine went bad. It shouldn't have gone bad. So now the Gemara asks, wait a minute. Are you sure that would be the case? And how could Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina say this? Because all of a sudden we're going to bring in a little bit of a time factor without being specific about it. Even if I kept the wine in your jugs the whole time, you can say to me when I go back to the store, X amount of time later, we don't know how much time, but we're going to learn right now, it would have to be the amount of time that on average one goes through a barrel of wine. Okay, obviously that depends on how many people you have in your house and all that, but let's just assume there was an average amount, or they knew exactly who they were selling it to. And they sold it to me, who has 5 kids in the house, and we drink X amount of wine, and we should have finished the barrel in a certain amount of time, let's say a week. And then right nowadays, it's pretty simple. We have, best used by, okay? In those days, they didn't have that. So there's an average lifespan of a barrel of wine that you buy. Now, you can say, hey, what's going on? Why are you returning this to me? You weren't supposed to keep it this long. You were supposed to have gone through it. It's not my fault that you decided to drink less wine than usual and save it. Who told you to save it? It's wine. Wine goes bad over time. You should know that. So now, even if I kept it in your jugs, I kept it too long, apparently. Again, this would only mean if I kept it too long, and We really don't know how long too long is, but let's just assume it was something that was known. And it must have been because they don't even bother telling you. To which the Gemara says, okay, so let's just add another point. According to Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Chanina, number one, it's only if we didn't switch to my own, right? It's only if we switch to my own vessels. If I left it in your vessels, then I can, of course, return it. But not if what, right? Now, not if you could say to me, why'd you leave it this long? So what would be the case then? He would say, I can't return it. If I left it in your vessels, I could still return it. The Amar Leila Mikpa. If I said to you, I want this for cooking, we learned cooking, that means you're going to use it over a much longer period of time because you're not drinking it, you're just using a little bit at a time. If I said I want it for the long term, then you can't complain to me and say, why'd you leave it so long? You, as the seller, should have provided me with wine that was going to last. So let's summarize, okay? According to the Mishnah, the way Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina reads it is 4 options, 4 permutations. Okay, there's lemikpeh and not lemikpeh, and there's you switch the jugs, you didn't switch the jugs. So let's put them all together. If I told you I want it for the long term, then I can return it as long as I left it in your jugs. Okay, so even though the Mishnah says you can't return it, this is the key. Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina thinks there is a case where you could return it, which would require 2 things. Number 1, I kept it in your jugs. Number 2, I told you I want it for the long term. But any of the other possibilities, whether I told you I want it for the long term, but I switched into my own jugs, or I didn't tell you I wanted it for the long term, doesn't matter whether I switched jugs or didn't switch jugs. I should have used it, and then I can't return it. Okay? It was my fault for leaving it for too long. So now the Gemara says, since we now just said there's 3 out of 4 options of what the case in the Mishnah could be, so let's go back to the beginning of Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina. He said, Lo shanu ela b'kankanim de lokach. But why did he say it that way? My ducha de Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina lokma lemanitim b'kankanim de lokach hu dekarma leila mikpa. He had to say, right, in order to say, how can we explain the Mishnah? He said it has to be 2 things. Both you switched kelim and even if, right, and you said I want it for the long term, because that's what in the end he said. The Mishnah is that case. But we know that there's 2 other cases that could have worked, and he didn't need to say kankanim de lokach. He could have said kankanim de mocher and lo amar leila mikpa, because we said also that case you can't return it. So that's the Gemara's question. Lukma bekankanim de mocher de lo amar leila mikpa. That's why did he have to say it's when you switch the jugs and right and you said the mikpa? It could have been when you didn't switch the jugs and you kept them in the same jugs, but you didn't say that you wanted it for the long term. So Amar Rava, what motivated Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina to say it when really he could have said the other as well? Well, he explained the Mishnah that way because of the language of the Mishnah in the second sentence in the Mishnah. Amar Rava, manitin kashite. It was the language of the Mishnah that was bothering him. The katani, as it says in the Mishnah, im yadua she'eno machmitz harei mekach ta'ut. If it's known that this seller has wine that goes bad, it's a mekach ta'ut. You can return it and get your money back. But amai. So what if it's known that if we're assuming we're talking about where I should have drunk it by now, right? It was a certain amount of time had passed and it was my fault for not having my family all drink the wine until now. I kept it. I saved it too long. Even if it's known that your wine turns bad, why can I return it for mekach ta'ut? The seller can say you shouldn't have left it over this long. Right? I can't go back to the store after the expiration date and say this is bad. They'll say to me, right, even if I try to claim it was bad from the beginning, but why am I returning it now? Shouldn't have left it past the expiration date. So it must be that the reason is because the expiration date is irrelevant. If I bought, again, it's not really, in this case, it's not expiration date, because the point is I said from the beginning, and that's why Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina wanted to say the Mishnah must be in a case where I wanted it for the long term. And that's why, again, that's not a possible claim that the seller could make. And that's why the seller is a mekach ta'ut in that case. And then again, that explains our case also, why Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina said also in the first case, we're going to assume it's the mikpeh. Once you said it's the mikpeh, you want it for the long term. The only case where you're not going to be able to return it is if I switched the kelim. If I kept it in their vessels, their jugs, the seller's jugs, then I actually can return it. Okay, if I ask for it for the long term. And that's why and that's why he explained it that way, shmamina. That's all Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Chanina. That's the first explanation of the Mishnah. Again, the Mishnah is talking about, particularly, it was lemikvah. I wanted it for the long term, but I moved it into my own jugs, and because of that, I can't return it. But again, the key but here, because that's where someone's going to disagree. But if I kept it in seller's jugs, and I said I want it for the long term, and it didn't last, I can return it. But pliga de Rav Chiya bar Yosef. This disagrees with Rav Chiya bar Yosef's position. To Rav Chiya bar Yosef, and this is what you might call a more theological reason. Chamra mazala de mare garin. The owner's bad luck caused this, and bad luck is not really just because there's bad luck. It's the owner must have done something wrong to deserve this. How do you know? And then we're going to put all the fault on the owner. It's never the seller's responsibility. It's always the buyer's. Why did your wine go bad? Well, it says in the Pasuk, Av ki hayayin boged, the Pasuk in Chabakuk, okay, one of Trasar, when the yayin turns on you, okay, which means it goes bad, right? It's like a traitor, the word boged, but it means the wine goes bad. Gever yahir. It's because of a person's arrogance. It's the arrogance of the owner that causes the wine to go bad. This is like a reward and punishment, or punishment particularly. Okay, the reason for bad wine gets vinegary, is because the owner is arrogant. In which case, it must be the fault of the buyer, and you can never go back to the seller because the seller will say it's your fault. Well, I'm Rav married, and now already, so if we're talking about Yehirut, and we're talking about that pasuk, we're going to explain the continuation of that pasuk. The pasuk continues and says, "Below yinveh." What does yinveh mean? Okay. The root of yinveh is naveh, just someone's abode, someone's home, place they inhabit. My below yinveh. I'm Rav Mary, sorry. Haiman de Yahir. Afilo in shebete lo makabel. Someone who's arrogant, self on a pedestal, thinks of themselves, I'm so great. Even the people in their household, meaning their wife, doesn't accept them. Shene'amal gever yahir v'lo yinveh. Because it says, gever yahir v'lo yinveh. What's yinveh? My v'lo yinveh, ban naveh shelo. He won't even be accepted in his own home. His wife won't even accept him. She'll be so disgusted by his behavior. And another thing about arrogance, Amar Rav Yehuda Amarav, if you try to wear a cloak like Talmidei Chachamim wear and try to appear like you're Talmid Chacham and you're not really a Talmid Chacham, you will not be invited to be in the presence of God. How is that? They learn it from our pasuk because it says someone who's here is arrogant. By the way, if you remember, we talked about the clothing of the Talmidei Chachamim. They would go to the floor, it would cover their whole body. It was like super tsanua. And if you dress like that, but you're not deserving of dressing like that, it's interesting. You might just say everyone should have a higher standard, but no, because it shows you're kind of trying to say, I associate myself with these people. I am a Talmidei Chacham, and you're not. Well, that's arrogance. And you will not be invited to be in the courtyard of God, or however we define that, right? Whatever that means. Because it says lo yinveh ktiv hatam, there's a different pasuk that says el nevei kodesh, which is in the abode of God. So therefore the reference is to that same idea, and therefore it means you will not be zoche to be in the presence of God. I'm a Rava. Okay, now we're back to our topic, and we're going to talk about, we've got a little sidetracked about the arrogant issue. Now we're going to talk about some cases where we have more than one seller going on, and how does it work? I'm a Rava. So somebody sells a barrel, but they don't really sell it. They give a barrel of wine to someone, to a chemvani, to a storekeeper to sell. So there's the owner of the wine and there's the storekeeper. In order to sell it over time, so basically there's a wine owner, gives it to someone else to do the work of the selling. And then basically they're going to get all the money, but they'll pay the storekeeper some money for the work they did. Utakif apalgo atilt. Now, who's the real owner of this? The owner of the wine remains the original owner. So if it goes bad, either at half or a third, in other words, there's a third left or half left, and the rest of it goes bad before the seller finishes selling it all, dinahu de mekabel emine. You can return it back to the original owner because the chemvani did nothing wrong, right? And it was just really a messenger. And Who's the real owner? If we say what causes wine to go bad, the owner's arrogance. Well, the owner is the owner. The storekeeper never became the owner. They were just being a messenger, an in-between person. So therefore, they can just return the jug and give the money they made on it and get paid for their time and be done with it. They don't assume any responsibility, the middle person. But that's only if the storekeeper didn't change the berries. The berries is the spout where the wine comes out. Because then again, it's like the kelim of the lokah. Say that's why it went bad, because when you switched it, the wine got spoiled. Another qualification. Only if the day of the shuk hadn't arrived, and that's why they didn't manage to sell it in time. But if the day of the shuk came and they didn't sell it, well, then it's the storekeeper's responsibility, right? If the storekeeper just sat there twiddling their thumbs, didn't make announcements, come buy my wine, didn't put up nice signs, didn't try to attract people to come buy it, well, then it becomes the storekeeper's fault and not the original owner. Another case where there's perhaps joint responsibility, perhaps not, we'll see. Amarava. Okay, now we're talking about kablanu. So here it's more like all the Bava Metzia cases of the half milve, half pikada, and we have a business deal here where the owner of the wine gives their wine to somebody else to sell, and they're going to split the proceeds, which means they also split the level of responsibility, because half is viewed like a loan, half is like a pikadon. So therefore, each half is the responsibility of one of them. So each one assumes half the level of responsibility. And they're both really like half owners. Well, but here there's a different issue, because what happened here? Let's say it's me. I gave you my wine in a business deal for you to go sell it, but I said to you, and I made a certain condition. Okay, the notes here changes it to Zulshafat, which matches the Sugi and Bava Metzia, right? Remember Zulshafat had in the Asmachta Sugyot and Bava Metzia. I gave you wine to bring it to the city of Zulshafat, because there you can sell things for much higher prices. And I didn't want you to just sell it anywhere. I said, look, we'll split the proceeds, but go bring it to where it's the most expensive place to sell things. Okay, fine. So you do that. Adamate hatam zal, but by the time you got there, whether it was your fault because you dilly-dallied or not, it doesn't really matter. But by the time you got there, the prices dropped. And now the price is even lower than what you would have gotten had you just sold it in our city. So dinahu de makabele, since I set the criteria as the owner of the wine, I said, you must sell it there. I don't want you selling it anywhere else. Well, then it's that issue, even though generally we assume responsibility, and the response is like, for example, if it was stolen or lost on the way, then we would split the loss. But here, it's all my loss, because it was my stipulation that made you push off going to, till you got to Zulshafat. And the loss is on me. So now they ask further, Ibailahu, Havachalamai, what if it turned to vinegar? Is that also completely my fault? Or do we say vinegar is more like loss, theft, something like that? Amrle Rav Hillel Rav Ashi, ki haven't be Rav Kahana. When I was at Rav Kahana's, Amrle Chalalo. No, Chala, we assume equal responsibility. Udilo ke Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina. Now, this, by the way, is not like Rabbi Yosi Chanina, but like Rabbi Chiya bar Abba. Good review why. Rabbi Chiya bar Abba says the owners or owner, it's the bad luck of the owner. In this case, opposed to the previous case of the guy who had the storekeeper work as their messenger to sell it, but the storekeeper wasn't an owner. In this case, they both part own it. So therefore, they're going to both split the proceeds and all that and take the losses. So therefore, they split that. That's part of the losses that you split. That's what Rav Chiya would say. But not like Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina. Why? Because Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina says, okay, let's try to make the comparison. The storekeeper assumes responsibility if the storekeeper was told, keep this for the long term. Basically by me telling the person, go take it far off and go sell it there, I basically was telling you, I know this wine will last a long time, and it was my responsibility that the wine didn't last. Ika de amre, some people say, though, the reverse. Afilu chalanami mekabel. Actually, both assume equal responsibility if it turns to vinegar. Keman Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina, just like Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina, who's going to basically say, now in this case, we're going to say it's equal responsibility. The original owner is going to assume the responsibility for it, and that's based on what we just said in Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina. Yashan, now we're going to go back to the earlier cases in the Mishnah that we mentioned in the Mishnah. Yashan, Mishal Eshtekeh, and Miyushan, it's 3 years. So now they say, Tana, there's a bright that says, Umiyashen v'holech halachag. It has to last and continue aging until Sukkot, because Sukkot is a complete 3 years, because the time of the season when the wine would be ready would be Sukkot, so therefore it would have to be 3 years until Sukkot. See how they use the holidays all the time for timing things in the year. It would always go by holidays. Okay, new Mishnah. Okay, maybe we'll just review quickly before we move on. So what we had here, because we're going to move on to a totally different topic, we sell wine and the wine goes bad. The Mishnah says, other than a few unique cases, the Mishnah says, can't bring it back to the seller. Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Chanina said, oh, that's only because they switched vessels into their own vessels, but they kept in the original vessels. You could bring it back. However, that would only be if you said, I want it for the long term. If it was short term, then you should have finished it in the time you should have. And the fact that it went bad is your fault for not finishing it as the buyer, and then that wouldn't work. And then we said, but Rav Chiya disagrees, because Rav Chiya thinks actually you can never bring it back to the seller, because we think there's some theological reason, some punishment reason why your wine went bad, and we're always going to blame the buyer and never the seller. Then we had some offshoots of this case, right? We talked a little bit about the arrogance, why arrogance causes this, where we get it from, and other things about that pasuk about arrogance and how bad arrogance is. And then from there, we got into these other 2 cases where it was a question about who exactly was responsible and who did these go by, these issues. Now we're going to go back to another Mishnah. And now we're more back to the original Mishnayot of the 4th and the 5th chapter about if I sell something or I talk about something in an arrangement, what exactly do I mean? And here we're going to talk about size. So, I sold a space to you. Safrai says in Mishnah Eretz Israel that we seem to be talking about. We have the most obvious case would be we share a courtyard, and you want to expand your house into the courtyard. So you have to buy space from me. Or I hire you to build me another room. Buy it, which Safrai says it must be buy it here. It doesn't really mean the way we call a house. It means an extra room. And I hired you to do it, but I didn't tell you how big I want it. So the question is, if you sold me space for me to build a house or build a room, what's the minimum size that I can demand? And if I hired you to build me something, what's the minimum size that you have to build for me? Okay, so if it's Beit Chatanut L'Bano, here are some examples. Be a house for his son who's just about to get married, for him and his wife to live in, which again would be more like a room. That's what they did. They would add on rooms to their house. Ubeit almanut libito, or a house for his daughter who was widowed, who's now going to remarry. The Gemara is going to ask right away. The first question the Gemara is going to be, why is it specifically a house for a son who's getting married and a house for a daughter who's a widow who's getting married? Why not house for a son or daughter who's getting remarried, or a house for a son or daughter who's getting married for the first time? Why specifically boy there, girl there? It doesn't make sense. Or maybe it does. We'll see. So how much? Boneh 400 al 6. 4 cubits by 6. 4 cubits by 6 is a really small space, right? 4 cubits is like the space of a person with your arms out and that. Okay, that's pretty small. 4 by 6. Try living in a first of all, a house for sure. But if you say a room, okay, it's a pretty small room, but it's like a minimal size. That's divrei Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yishmael omer, refet bakarizo. What are you talking about? That's for cattle to live in. That's not for humans to live in. And therefore, okay, we'll read the Gemara, the Mishnah at least this way. The Gemara is going to suggest an alternative reading. According to Rabbi Yishmael, though, assuming this is Rabbi Yishmael speaking, if you want to do a refet bakar, that's 4 by 6. But bayit katan, a small house, would be 6 al 8, 6 by 8. Gadol, a big one, 8 al 10, 8 by 10. A traklin, which is going to be like a pavilion, 10 al 10 by 10. Notice that the other ones were rectangular. This is square. The Rashbam says this was a room used for officers to sit around. It was more decorative kind of thing, and therefore it was square. It wasn't rectangular. Whereas if you're living there, it would be more a rectangular room. Right? Very few people we know have square-shaped rooms. Some people do, but most bedrooms are rectangular. Rumo chatzi orko kechatzi rachbo. The height. What's the minimum height? Because we only spoke about length and width. What about height? Well, you take half. You add up the length and the width, and half that will be the height that you need. Ra'aya l'davar, here's proof for it. At least I'm reading it in one way. We'll see there's another way to read this line. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel omer kibinyan heichal. Well, the heichal, which had right, that's where the shulchan, the menorah, all that, and the kodesh kodeshim was in there. It was get my number straight, 20 by 40 with a height of 30. So 20, 40 is, and I hope that was with the right numbers. Let me make sure I remembered it. Yeah, it's 20 by 40 with a height of 30. Okay, so I think this doesn't include the kodesh kodeshim, if I remember correctly. I think it doesn't. So 20 by 40 with a height of 30. So 20 and 40 is 60. Height of 30 is, right, that's half of 60. Lamali the Mishna. So the Gemara now starts off and says, Lamali the Mishna beit chatanut u beit amanut lebito. So why are we talking about? Just one second. I want to see one thing. Okay. Why do we have beit chatanut lebino, beit amanut lebito? Why did you say it like that? Lene beit chatanut lebino lebito. Right here, all of a sudden there's we should include the women there, and beit amanut lebino lebito. Why don't you include the men there? I don't understand. So they say milta agav orche kamashman. It's teaching you something, by the way, which is delo darka dechatna lemedar bechamua. It's not appropriate for a son-in-law to live in their in-laws' house. Meaning, when a couple gets married, you shouldn't live in the wife's parents' house. You should move to the husband's parents' house, and that's why the beit chatanut they were talking about was that. Now, why? Now, this is always a bit of a strange thing, but there's concern that there's going to be znut, improper relations. If the husband lives with the father-in-law and the mother-in-law, somehow will end up in the house alone with the mother-in-law, and something might transpire, and that's our rayot, and we want to avoid that. It's a little bit strange to think about that they'd really be concerned for that, but apparently it just wasn't done. How do we know this? Kedichtiv, right? And only in a second marriage do we do it. Now, all of a sudden in a second marriage, it's okay. It's a good question, but they don't really seem to address that. Just want to check if the Rashbam says anything about that. Right. Yeah, they don't really say it. And now they're going to prove that this was really frowned upon in those days by quoting a book from the Sefer Ben Sira, which is one of these Sifrei Chokhmah that existed in that time, that is often quoted in the Gemara. Sefer Ben Sira, Hakol shakalti b'kaf maznayim. I've weighed everything in the weights and in the scales. Right, he doesn't really mean literally. The worst of the worst is bran. Okay, they hated bran. It's always talked about as the worst item. But that's the worst of the worst. And guess what? Worse than that is chatana dar bebeit chamid, a son-in-law who lives in his father-in-law's house. Now, that's the worst of the worst, which is even worse than the worst. And now they're going to say, well, there's something even worse than that. You get invited somewhere and then you bring another guest along with you. That's really not appropriate. And worse than that, you answer someone before you even listen to what they're asking, or before they finish asking their question. There's always those people that break in and interrupt, right? That's the worst of the worst. How do we know that's the worst of the worst? Okay, if someone answers before they hear, this is a pasuk from Mishle, from Proverbs, it's ivelet and klima. That's like, fool's talk and embarrassing. It's like the worst of the worst. Okay, back to our Mishnah. Rabbi Yishmael refet bakari zo, right there. That's a refet bakar. That's for animals, that small space. Harotzel asot, right? Now, who said that line? I told you already it's going to be a bit of a debate. Refet bakar man katanila. Who said that line? So, ikad amar Rabbi Yishmael ikad amar Rabbi Akiva katanila. Some people say it's the continuation of Rabbi Yishmael. Some people say it's Rabbi Akiva. We read as Rabbi Yishmael. Well, the Gemara is going to first explain how to read it like Rabbi Akiva. Ikad amar Rabbi Akiva katanila. Hachi kamar. He was trying to say is, if you want to make a refet bakar, it's 4 by 6. And people could live there as well. And that just supports what he's trying to say. And a response to Rabbi Yishmael that, what do you mean? There's a refet bakar, to which Rabbi Yishmael said, yeah, people could live in a refet bakar. So it reminds me of, other things, but like the Holocaust when people hid in farms, right? Obviously we know that's wasn't really a way to live. Rabbi Yishmael katanila. Some people say Rabbi Yishmael said this. Ve'hachi kamar. What he meant to say was, and this is how we read it, harotzelas harefet bakaros arba modal sheish. But if you want a house, it's this. If you want another house, it's that. Now, by the way, Rabbi Yishmael has all these gradations. This is a little bigger, this is a little bigger. The assumption is Rabbi Kiva also thinks each one's a little bigger than the previous, but he starts much lower at 4x6 rather than 6x8. Traklin Esther al Esther, my traklin. So they want to know, what is a traklin? Kupta be varde. It's a kupta, like a cube. Okay, it's a square room that they would put roses, like a rose pavilion. Tane, there's a brighta that actually adds another measurement. Kantir shtemesre al shtemesre. Okay, it's 12x12. What's a kantir? My kantir, tarbetz apandi. It's a big courtyard they would have outside palaces. That was a bigger space because it wasn't a built space. You could always be more generous with non-built space, and that's 12x12. This is a quote from the Mishna. The height is double, right? Half of the amount, the length plus the width, half of that amount. And what's our proof? The heichal. Also, this line, who said that line? Some people say it was Rashbag, because notice it says, Rashbag says. So, the way you would read it is like this. Raya davar minayin. What's the proof? And comes Rashbag and answers, and that's how we read it. Amar Rashbag kakol kebinyan heichal. Ika da amar Tanakama katanela. Really, it's Tanakama speaking. Rashbag atmoy kamatama. In other words, like this. Okay, and Rashbag was saying it rhetorically, like what? So let's read it. Hachi kamar le Tanakama. This is what he says to Tanakama. You said it's half the length plus the width. But where are you getting that from? It's a question. What are you getting it from? The way the heichal was built? What? You think people build their houses like the Beit HaMikdash? Of course not. The measurements of the Beit HaMikdash were unique to this big, fancy building. That's not how people build their regular houses. So that's a ridiculous, and then it's all kind of said in what are you talking about as a question? Okay, Tanya. And in fact, right to this says, there's a different opinion. It's not half the length plus the width. It actually is the length of the beams, which is really about the width of the house. So now, right, the beams were the beams on the roof, on the ceiling. So they say, wait, if the beams are basically the length of the room, and that's the size, so why don't you just say Velema rumo kiruchbo? Why don't you say the height of the room is supposed to be the same length as the width of the room? To which they give two answers. Maybe the houses were narrower at the bottom, which means the width would be X, but the beams at the top were actually longer. So therefore, and since it has to be that longer amount, that's why they said like the beams. Or maybe because there were windows and the beams would rest on the windows. Now the window is open, and that means the width is from the inside part of the window, but the beams go toward the outer part of the window, which means they're longer. So in both explanations, they're longer, and that's why it says these, because it's the longer amount, it's the real amount. Rav Chanina nafik l'kriyata. Rav Chanina went out to the city. Ramlu krad. That day they asked him about a contradiction between two psukim, and this will finish. Ktiv, in Sefer Malachim, when they build the temple, it gives measurements. And it says there, Habayit asher banash Shlomo la'Hashem, 60 amah orko, 20 rochbo, u30 amah komato. So the house that Shlomo built, this is the heichal with the kodesh kodeshim. I guess that amount must have been in the temple, because it was 40 by 20, and this is 60 by 20, because the kodesh kodeshim itself was 20 by 20. So 20 by 20 plus 40 plus 20 by 20 is 60 by 20. So it was 60 amot long, 20 amot width, rochbo, and 30 amah komato, and 30 of height. Uchtiv lifnei hadvir 20 amah orech, 20 amah rochav, 20 amah komato. In that same chapter, it says, well, the part where the kodesh kodeshim was 20 by 20 with a height of 20. And we just said the height was 30. How could the height of the kodesh kodeshim be lower than the height of the heichal and the kodesh kodeshim together? It all had the same height. Mar lahu, to which Rabbi Chanina answered, it's not a contradiction. That measurement of 20 started from the height above the kruvim, the cherubim, I don't know how you say it in English, but the kruvim that were in the kodesh kodeshim they counted when they talked about the height from the top of that. They were 10 amot high, and therefore they were only counting the top 20. To which the Gemara says, "My kamash from them." Why? Why were they counting it like that? If you talk about the height of the room, you talk about from the floor. Why from the top of the kruvim? For that, we'll have to wait till tomorrow to get your answer. So the second part of the daf was really talking about selling a space to build. How much is the minimum for a house, for a room, for different kinds of rooms that, right? We said house really means room. And then there were different types of rooms in different sizes. We had a basic machlokah of Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Yishmael. We had a few lines in the Mishna that we weren't sure exactly how to read them. Is the heichal the proof, or is the heichal not a good proof? And that was basically the second part of today's daf. And here we'll stop, continue tomorrow, and you'll get the answer to our question that we ended with. Wishing everyone a great day.